She fucked the bastard so that he would cook for her. He thought he had drawn a lucky ticket, but hey, I never thought I'd be posting here. But life is a way of throwing curveballs, right? My name's Jake, and I've been married to Emily for 8 years. We have 2 kids, Liam, 7, and Sophie, 5. To the outside world, we were the picture-perfect suburban family. I'm an accountant, and Emily is a stay-at-home mom who loves to cook, bake, and host dinner parties. From the beginning, food was Emily's love language. She'd always say, "A way to a man's heart is through his stomach." And honestly, she had me hooked. Her lasagna was to die for. Her cupcakes won every PDA bake sale, and I loved watching her light up when she talked about trying new recipes. But about 3 months ago, something shifted. Emily started spending more time out of the house. At first, it was the usual. I'm meeting Sarah for coffee, or I need to grab some things for dinner. But then it became, I'm taking a cooking class downtown twice a week, and she'd come home later and later. The food at home started to change too. She'd bring these elaborate dishes home and say, "Oh, Chef Nick taught me this," with this weird little smile. Chef Nick this, Chef Nick that. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, she loved cooking, right? But then Liam asked at dinner one night, "Why does Mommy always talk about Chef Nick? Does he make better food than you, Dad?" I laughed it off, but Emily didn't. She just gave Liam a look and said, "Don't be silly, honey. Chef Nick is just a great teacher." But something about the way she said it, too quick, too defensive, made me feel like I'd just bitten into something sour. That's when I started noticing other things. After that dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Emily had never been the type to be secretive, but now her phone was practically glued to her hand. She'd always been the one to leave it lying around, unlocked, but suddenly, she had a passcode. One night, I casually asked, "What's with the lock on your phone? Trying to keep the kids from downloading more Roblox?" She laughed a little too loudly. "Yeah, exactly. Sophie almost bought $100 worth of gems last week." I let it slide, but my gut told me she was lying. Then there were her absences. The cooking classes that were supposed to last 2 hours stretched to 4. Once I called her when Sophie had a fever, and she didn't pick up. She texted back an hour later saying, "Sorry, Chef Nick had us practice knife skills, and I couldn't answer." Knife skills? At 9 p.m.? I started noticing the way she'd talk about Chef Nick. Her face would light up whenever she mentioned him, which was a stark contrast to how she'd been treating me lately. She'd always been affectionate, but now she seemed distant, distracted. If I tried to initiate anything romantic, she'd claim she was too tired or had a headache. One Friday night, she came home smelling like smoked paprika and something else. Something I couldn't put my finger on, but made my stomach churn. I asked her how the class went, and she gushed about this amazing new technique Chef Nick had shown them. That's when Liam piped up again. "Mom, are you ever going to invite Chef Nick over for dinner? You talk about him more than Daddy." Emily froze, her cheeks turning pink. She quickly recovered and said, "That's silly, Liam. Chef Nick's way too busy for that." Busy, huh? I decided it was time to get busy myself. That night, after Emily went to bed, I pulled out my laptop and started doing a little digging. If this Chef Nick guy was such a culinary god, he had to have a presence online, right? What I found made my blood run cold. I didn't have to look far to find Chef Nick. His Instagram was public, and boy, was he active. His feed was full of artfully plated dishes, pictures of him grinning in a pristine chef's coat, and, this was the kicker, photos of his cooking classes. I scrolled through, and sure enough, there was Emily in a group photo, standing way too close to him, holding a tray of eclairs. She was wearing that dress she always said was too fancy for errands. She looked happy, happier than she'd been with me in months. I told myself it was nothing, just a group class photo, right? But then I started reading the captions. "Another amazing night with my talented students. Special shout out to Emily for nailing the souffle. You're a natural." The comments didn't help either. Emily had replied with, "Couldn't have done it without you." Without you? Seriously? I scrolled deeper. Chef Nick posted almost every day, and Emily's name popped up in the comments more than I cared to admit. Sometimes it was innocent stuff, compliments on the food, questions about recipes. But other times it felt off. One post, a picture of him holding a glass of wine, had her commenting, "Looks like you're having fun. Save a glass for me next time." Next time? I try to brush it off, telling myself I was overreacting. But then I hit that post. It was a photo of a private dinner setup, candles, wine, and a table set for two. The caption read, "When passion meets the perfect pairing." There were no tags, no comments from Emily. But the wine glasses were the same brand we had at home, and the candle holders looked eerily familiar. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. But I wasn't. The next day, I told Emily I'd take the kids to the park, so she could have some me time. Instead, I dropped them off at my mom's and drove straight to the cooking school. I parked across the street and waited. And there they were, Emily and Chef Nick, walking out together, laughing like old friends, or something more. She had her hand on his arm, and he leaned in close, saying something that made her toss her head back in laughter. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest, that I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every instinct in me screamed to get out and confront them right there in the street. But I forced myself to wait, to watch. They walked to his car, a sleek black coupe that screamed midlife crisis, and stood there talking for a few minutes. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in months. Then, before I could even process what I was seeing, she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a friendly peck or an awkward goodbye. It was passionate, deliberate, and completely shattering. I felt like the world had stopped. My wife, the mother of my children, was kissing another man in broad daylight, like she didn't have a care in the world. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone and snapped a picture. I didn't want to. I hated myself for it, but I needed proof. They finally broke apart, and she got into her car and drove away. I stayed parked, my heart pounding, as I watched him saunter back into the building. That evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. After the kids were in bed, I sat Emily down in the living room. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Busy. I had a lot to do after class." "Oh yeah." I leaned forward, looking her straight in the eye. "And how was Chef Nick?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I saw you. I saw you kissing him in the parking lot today." For a moment, she looked stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. But then, just as quickly, her expression changed. Her lips pressed into a tight line, and her face hardened. "That's ridiculous," she said flatly. "You're imagining things." I pulled out my phone and showed her the picture. Her face went pale. Part 5, Lies, Lies, and More Lies. Emily stared at the picture for a moment, then scoffed. This is your big evidence? You think that proves something?" "It proves everything," I snapped. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with him while I'm here taking care of our kids. Do you even feel guilty, Emily?" She crossed her arms, her voice dripping with indignation. "You don't understand. It's not what it looks like." "Oh, really?" I shot back. "Because it looks like you've been cheating on me with your cooking instructor. Enlighten me if there's another explanation." She sighed dramatically, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Nick and I have a connection, yes, but it's not what you think. He's just been helping me figure things out." "Figure what out?" "How to destroy our marriage." She rolled her eyes, which made my blood boil. "No, Hucky. How to be happy. I've been so unhappy, and you haven't even noticed. All you do is work and sit on the couch watching sports. Nick, he listens to me. He understands me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So your solution to being unhappy was to cheat on me? To kiss another man?" Her voice grew sharp. "I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. And maybe if you paid a little more attention to me, I wouldn't have felt so alone." I sat back, stunned. She was actually blaming me for this. "So this is my fault now?" She stood up, pacing the room. "I'm not saying that, but things haven't been good between us for a long time, Jake. You have to admit that." I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. "Emily, we have 2 kids. We have a life. And you're willing to throw all that away for some guy who makes soufflés?" She stopped pacing and turned to face me. Her eyes were cold, her expression unreadable. "Maybe I am." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The next morning, Emily acted as if nothing had happened. She made breakfast for the kids, humming to herself in the kitchen, while I sat at the table, barely touching my coffee. It was surreal, watching her pour syrup on Liam's waffles and kiss Sophie on the forehead like our family wasn't on the brink of collapse. I couldn't keep it together for long. As the kids ran off to play, Liam stopped at the doorway and turned back to me. "Dad, why do you look sad?" I glanced at Emily, who froze for a moment before turning her back to the sink. I didn't want to lie to my kids, but I wasn't ready to shatter their world either. "I'm fine, buddy. Just tired. But kids aren't stupid." Liam frowned and walked over to me. "Is it about Mom and that cooking guy? I heard you last night." My stomach dropped. Emily whipped around, her eyes wide. "Liam, that's not something you need to worry about," she said quickly, her voice too bright. "What's a cooking guy?" Sophie asked, wandering back in with her favorite stuffed animal. Emily shot me a glare that could have cut glass. "Jake, can we talk?" "In private." She didn't wait for me to answer, marching off to the bedroom. I followed, my heart pounding. As soon as the door closed, she spun around. "What the hell, Jake? You let the kids hear us arguing." I couldn't believe her audacity. "I didn't let them hear anything. Maybe if you weren't sneaking around and blowing up our lives, there wouldn't be anything for them to overhear." Her face hardened. "Fine, if you're so determined to paint me as the bad guy, let's get it all out in the open. Do you really want the kids to know everything? That Mommy's a terrible person and Daddy's a saint?" I was stunned. "I just want them to know the truth, Emily. You can't keep pretending nothing's wrong." For a moment, I thought she was going to cry. But instead, she just nodded. "Fine, let's tell them. But don't think for a second that you're innocent in all this." I left the room before I said something I'd regret. Part 7. Dinner and Deception. That evening, Emily suggested we all have dinner together as a family, which felt like some sick joke. But I agreed, hoping for some semblance of normalcy for the kids' sake. She went all out: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and her signature chocolate cake. The table looked like something out of a magazine. Halfway through the meal, Liam blurted out, "Mom, are you going to stop going to cooking class?" Emily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. She glanced at me before turning to Liam with a forced smile. "Why would I stop, honey? I love learning new things." "But Dad's upset about it," Liam said matter-of-factly. "And you're always talking about that Chef Nick guy." The tension in the room was suffocating. I saw Emily's jaw tighten, but she managed to keep her voice calm. "Liam, grown-ups sometimes have disagreements, but it doesn't mean anything bad. We're fine." Sophie, who had been quietly eating her mashed potatoes, suddenly chimed in. "Is Chef Nick going to come to dinner? I want to meet him." Emily's face turned bright red, and she stood up abruptly, grabbing her plate. "I think we're done here." She disappeared into the kitchen without another word. I stayed at the table with the kids, trying to keep my voice steady as I told them, "Everything's okay, guys. Let's just finish up." But deep down, I knew everything was far from okay. The house was eerily quiet after dinner. Emily had gone upstairs, leaving me to clean up and get the kids ready for bed. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation at the table, the way Liam and Sophie had so innocently exposed the cracks in our lives. After the kids were asleep, I decided I couldn't keep living like this. The lies, the tension, the pretending, it was eating me alive. I needed answers. I went to our bedroom, finding Emily sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. She sighed and put her phone down. "What now, Jake? What now?" I repeated, incredulous. "Emily, you've been cheating on me. You've been lying to me, to the kids. You've been sneaking around with this guy, like our marriage doesn't even matter to you." She rolled her eyes. "We've had this conversation already. I told you it wasn't planned. Things just happened." "That's not good enough," I said, my voice rising. "You're willing to throw away 8 years, our family, for what? Some fling with a chef?" Her expression turned icy. "It's not just a fling, Jake. Nick understands me in a way you never have. He makes me feel alive again." "You still here? Stunned? Alive? Are you serious? What about me? What about Liam and Sophie? Don't we matter to you?" She stood up, her voice sharp. "Of course you matter, but I matter too, Jake. I've been miserable for years, and you didn't even notice. All you care about is work and the kids. When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling, or even looked at me like I was more than a housekeeper or a babysitter?" Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but a part of me wondered if she was right. Had I been so focused on everything else that I'd missed the signs? But then I thought of the kids, of the life we'd built together, and anger surged back to the surface. So, your solution was to cheat? To sneak around and lie? That's how you handle being unhappy? She crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. You don't get it, Jake. You never have. And honestly, I don't think you ever will. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words hanging between us. Finally, I broke it. Then maybe we're done here, I said quietly. Her face didn't change. She just nodded, as if she'd been expecting this. Maybe we are. I walked out of the room, my chest tight, my mind racing. This wasn't how I'd imagined our life together ending, but I couldn't see a way back from this that I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling and replaying the argument in my head. Sleep was impossible, and by morning I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I didn't know what to do or how to even begin untangling the mess our lives had become. Emily came downstairs around 8 a.m., dressed and ready like it was any other day. She didn't say a word as she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. I was bracing myself for another round of excuses or accusations when she broke the silence with something I never expected. I've been thinking, she said, her voice unnervingly calm. Maybe we should just separate for a while. Take some space and figure out what we both want. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Separate? What about the kids? What about our family? She looked down at her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. We'll figure it out. We can share custody, make it work. But I think this is for the best. For the best, I repeated, my voice rising. Emily, this isn't just about you and me. This is about Liam and Sophie. Do you really think this is what's best for them? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually feel guilty. But then she spoke, and her words sent a chill down my spine. Nick has already offered to help, she said quietly. Help? I asked, dumbfounded. Help with what? With everything, she said, meeting my eyes for the first time. If we separate, he wants me to move in with him. He says he'll support me and the kids until we figure things out. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You're kidding me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You're seriously considering moving in with him? Bringing our kids into this mess? She had the audacity to look offended. Nick isn't a bad person, Jake. He cares about me. He cares about all of us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All of us? Emily. He's the reason we're in this situation in the first place. And now you want to uproot our kids' lives and move in with him, like it's some kind of fairy tale. She stood up, her voice rising. At least Nick listens to me, Jake. At least he makes me feel like I matter. Can you honestly say you've done that in the past few years? I was too stunned to respond. I watched as she grabbed her purse and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the kitchen with a sick feeling in my stomach. The silence in the house after Emily left was deafening. I sat there at the kitchen table, staring at her empty coffee cup, trying to wrap my head around what she'd just said. She was actually considering moving in with Nick, dragging our kids into this circus of a situation. I couldn't let it happen. No matter what had gone wrong between us, Liam and Sophie didn't deserve to have their world turned upside down like this. I decided then and there that I had to take action. I called my best friend Mike. We've known each other since college, and if anyone could talk some sense into me or offer advice, it was him. He showed up at my house within the hour, his face a mix of confusion and concern. All right, he said, sitting across from me. What the hell is going on? I laid it all out for him. The cooking classes, Nick, the affair, and Emily's shocking proposal to move in with the guy. By the time I finished, Mike looked like he was ready to punch someone. You've got to fight this, Jake, he said firmly. You can't let her take the kids and move in with some random guy she barely knows. She says she's unhappy. I muttered, my voice thick with frustration, that I haven't been paying attention to her. Maybe she's right. Maybe I let things get stale. Mike shook his head. Don't blame yourself for her choices. Yeah, maybe your marriage had issues, but cheating isn't the answer. And involving the kids? That's crossing a line. His words lit a fire in me. He was right. I couldn't just sit back and let Emily dictate how this was going to play out. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. I needed to understand my rights, especially when it came to the kids. The lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Karen, didn't sugarcoat anything. If she's planning to move in with this guy, that could complicate custody arrangements, Karen said. Judges don't look kindly on situations that destabilize children's lives. Document everything, texts, emails, any proof of her relationship with this man. It could be critical if this goes to court. Document everything. The words echoed in my head as I hung up the phone. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Liam and Sophie. But just when I thought I had a plan, Emily came home that evening with another bombshell. "I've already talked to Nick," she announced as soon as she walked through the door. "He's offering to let me and the kids move in by the end of the month." "You still here? Dumbfunde. The end of the month? That's 2 weeks away. Emily, have you completely lost your mind?" She crossed her arms, her expression defiant. "It's what's best for everyone. You can stay here. We'll figure out custody, but the kids deserve to live somewhere happy." The audacity of her words hit me like a slap in the face. "You really think moving them into some stranger's house is what's best for them?" Her voice rose. "He's not a stranger, Jake. He's someone who actually cares about me. About us." I couldn't take it anymore. "You want a happy life, Emily? Fine. But over my dead body are you taking my kids into that man's house?" Her face turned cold. "Then maybe we'll let a judge decide." Emily's words hung in the air like a threat, but I didn't back down. I wasn't about to let her uproot Liam and Sophie's lives because of her reckless choices. If she wanted to fight, she'd get one. The next morning, I called Karen back and told her everything Emily had said. Karen didn't waste time. "We need to move quickly," she said. "File for temporary custody and an injunction to prevent her from moving the kids out of the house. The court will want to maintain stability for them, especially given her questionable decision-making." By the end of the day, I'd signed the papers. It felt surreal, like I was officially admitting my marriage was over. But the thought of Emily dragging my kids into Nick's orbit kept me going. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it to protect them. When Emily came home that evening, I decided to break the news before she found out another way. "We need to talk," I said as soon as she walked through the door. She looked tired, like she'd had a long day. "What now, Jake? Can't this wait?" "No, it can't," I said firmly. "I filed for temporary custody today." Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely shocked. "You what?" "I'm not letting you take the kids to Nick's house," I said. "It's not happening, Emily. You can do whatever you want with your life, but Liam and Sophie aren't going anywhere." Her shock quickly turned to anger. "How dare you? You think you're the only one who cares about them? You're trying to paint me as some terrible mother when all I've ever done is take care of them. Taking care of them doesn't mean dragging them into your mess," I snapped. "You're the one who's putting your feelings ahead of theirs, not me." She glared at me, her voice shaking. "Do you really think a judge is going to side with you? You're never home. You're the one who's been distant, Jake, not me." "Then let's let the court decide," I said. "But until then, the kids stay here." She stared at me for a long moment, her jaw tight. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out without another word. I didn't know where she was going, and honestly, I didn't care. All I cared about was making sure Liam and Sophie stayed safe. But the next day, Emily came back with a new plan. And it was worse than anything I could have imagined. That I should have expected Emily wouldn't take the custody filing lying down, but I wasn't prepared for how far she'd go. The next morning, I woke up to an email from her lawyer. She was counterfiling for full custody, claiming that I was emotionally unavailable and uninvolved in the children's daily lives. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Uninvolved? I'd been the one holding everything together while she was sneaking around with her chef boyfriend. I was the one who stayed up late helping Liam with his science project, who made up bedtime stories when Sophie was too scared to sleep. But now she was twisting the narrative, painting me as some distant father while she played the role of the doting mom. I called Karen immediately, and she didn't sugarcoat things. "It's not uncommon for people to throw everything at the wall to see what sticks," she said. "But this is going to get messy, Jake. You need to be prepared." Messy didn't even begin to describe it. That evening, Emily came home with a smirk on her face and a stack of papers in her hand. "You wanted to play hardball, Jake? Fine. Let's play." She dropped the papers on the counter, and my stomach sank as I skimmed through them. She was claiming that I worked too much, that I had no idea how to handle the kids' routines, and that I was hostile and controlling. "You're seriously doing this?" I asked, my voice low with disbelief. "You started it," she snapped. "You think you can just take my kids away from me? Over my dead body?" "There are kids, Emily," I shot back. "And I'm not trying to take them away from you. I'm trying to protect them from this disaster you're dragging them into." She crossed her arms, her eyes flashing. "You want to protect them? Then maybe you should take a good, hard look at yourself. You're the one who's never here, who never notices when something's wrong. Maybe if you had, we wouldn't be in this situation." Her words stung, but I refused to let her see it. "And maybe if you'd talked to me instead of running to Nick, we could have fixed things. But you made your choice, Emily. Don't try to blame this on me." The argument went in circles until she finally stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I was left standing in the kitchen, staring at the custody papers and wondering how things had gotten this bad. The next day, Karen called with news that made everything worse. "Emily's lawyer is pushing for a hearing within the next week," she said. "She's claiming you're unfit and that the children would be better off in her care full-time." It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. A week, that wasn't enough time to prepare, to gather evidence, to prove that I was a good father. But I didn't have a choice. Then, as if the universe wasn't done kicking me, Liam came downstairs that night holding my phone. "Dad," he said quietly, "Mom told me we might have to live with her friend Nick. Is that true?" I froze, my heart breaking at the fear in his voice. "What did she say, buddy?" "She said you're mad at her, and now we might not all live together anymore," he whispered. "I don't want to live with that guy. I don't even know him." I pulled Liam into a hug, trying to keep my own voice steady. "No one's going anywhere right now, okay? I promise. Dad's going to do everything he can to keep us together." But as I held him, I realized that promise would be harder to keep than I'd ever imagined. After Liam's heartbreaking question, I knew I had to step up my game. This wasn't just about proving myself as a capable father. It was about making sure my kids felt safe and secure, no matter how chaotic things got. But with Emily escalating her legal threats and dragging Nick into the picture, I felt like I was fighting a losing battle. That's when something completely unexpected happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, flipping through legal paperwork and feeling utterly overwhelmed, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Jake, this is Sarah, Emily's old friend. Can we meet? I think there's something you need to know." I hadn't spoken to Sarah in years. She and Emily had been close back in the day, but they drifted apart long before any of this started. I wasn't sure what to make of her message, but I figured I had nothing to lose. I replied, and we agreed to meet that afternoon at a coffee shop. When I walked in, Sarah was already sitting at a table, nervously stirring her drink. She looked up and gave me a small, apologetic smile. "Hey, Jake. Thanks for meeting me." "Sure," I said cautiously, sitting down across from her. "What's this about?" She glanced around as if making sure no one was listening, then leaned in. "I heard about what's going on with you and Emily," she said quietly. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but there's something you need to know about Nick." My stomach tightened. "What about him?" Sarah hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed me a series of screenshots. Messages, photos, and even receipts, all pointing to one disturbing truth. Nick wasn't just involved with Emily. He had a history of getting involved with married women. "He's done this before," Sarah said, her voice low but urgent. "He got close to another student in one of his classes a couple of years ago. She was married too, with kids. It ended badly. Her husband found out and confronted him, and it turned into this huge scandal." I stared at the screenshots, a mix of anger and disgust boiling in my chest. "How do you know all this?" "I work with someone who knows his ex-girlfriend," Sarah explained. "When I heard about what was happening with you and Emily, I started asking questions. I thought you should know the kind of person he really is. This was a game changer. If I could prove that Nick had a pattern of behavior like this, it might strengthen my case in court." "Sarah," I said, looking her in the eye, "thank you. This could make all the difference." She nodded, but there was something else in her expression, something hesitant. "Jake, I know Emily's made some terrible choices, but don't let this destroy you. Focus on the kids. They're the ones who need you the most right now. I thanked her again and left the coffee shop, my mind racing. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had an edge. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this was far from over. Armed with the information Sarah had given me, I knew I had to tread carefully. It wasn't just about exposing Nick, it was about making sure the truth came out in a way that would protect Liam and Sophie. I forwarded the screenshot Sarah had provided to Karen, who was cautiously optimistic. "This could be big, Jake," she said during our call. "If we can establish a pattern of predatory behavior on Nick's part, it could undermine Emily's case. But we'll need more than hearsay. Can you get statements or contact the people involved?" I didn't know where to start, but luck, or fate, was on my side. That afternoon, I received an email from a woman named Claire. She introduced herself as the wife of the man Sarah had mentioned, the one whose marriage Nick had helped destroy. "I heard from Sarah that you're dealing with Nick too," she wrote. "I wanted to reach out because I've been in your shoes. If you need someone to talk to or any information about what he's done, I'm here." I called her immediately. Claire's voice was steady, but tinged with bitterness as she recounted her experience. "Nick is a manipulator," she said bluntly. "He preys on vulnerable women. He charms them, makes them feel special, and then convinces them to leave everything behind for him. But once he gets what he wants, he loses interest. That's exactly what happened to me and my husband." "Does he ever target the kids?" I asked, my chest tightening at the thought. Claire hesitated. "Not directly, but he doesn't care about the damage he causes. To him, it's all about feeding his ego. He plays the role of the perfect partner, but it's a facade." She sent me copies of her own correspondence with Nick from when everything had fallen apart in her life. Texts, emails, even legal documents from her divorce. I forwarded everything to Karen, who assured me it would strengthen our case. But I couldn't just sit and wait for the legal system to play out. I needed to confront Emily. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. She looked up annoyed. "What now, Jake? Another lecture about how I've ruined everything?" "No," I said, pulling up the screenshot Sarah and Claire had given me. "This is about Nick." Her eyes flicked to my phone, and I saw the first flicker of doubt in her expression. "What is that?" "It's proof that your perfect chef Nick isn't who you think he is," I said. "He's done this before, Emily. You're not the first married woman he's targeted." She snorted, but it sounded forced. "Oh, please. You're just digging for dirt because you can't handle the fact that I've moved on." "Read it," I said, shoving the phone into her hands. She hesitated, then started scrolling through the screenshots. As she read, her face went pale. Her hands began to tremble, and she set the phone down like it burned her. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, her voice shaking. "People can change. He's not like that anymore. Wake up, Emily," I said, my voice rising. "He's playing you. He doesn't care about you, and he sure as hell doesn't care about Liam and Sophie. Is this really the person you're willing to destroy our family for?" For the first time, she didn't have a snarky comeback. She just stared at the floor, silent. But before I could press further, my phone buzzed with a message from Karen. "New development. Call me ASAP." I stepped outside to call Karen, leaving Emily alone in the living room, still reeling from the evidence I'd shown her. My heart pounded as I dialed, anxious about what new twist this situation could possibly take. Karen picked up on the first ring. "Jake, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice unusually animated. "Nick has a criminal record. I just got the report." "What?" I asked, stunned. "For what?" "Fraud," she said. "Turns out he's been involved in a few shady business deals, including one where he embezzled money from a restaurant he co-owned. It didn't make major headlines, but it's in the public record. This is exactly the kind of thing we needed." I felt a rush of relief and fury at the same time. "This guy really is a piece of work," I said. "Can we use this in court?" "Absolutely," Karen replied. "It shows a pattern of deception and instability. A judge isn't going to look favorably on someone like him being around your kids." I thanked her and hung up, feeling like I finally had the upper hand. But I wasn't done. I walked back inside, determined to confront Emily with this latest revelation. She was still sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. When I told her about Nick's criminal record, her reaction was immediate. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear, Jake, I didn't know." Her tears might have moved me once, but not now. "And that's the man you wanted to move in with? The man you thought would be a better role model for our kids than me?" She shook her head, her voice breaking. I was stupid. I didn't think. I was just so angry at you and how distant everything felt. And Nick, he made me feel wanted. I didn't realize. I cut her off. Well, now you realize. And you have a choice to make, Emily. Either you end this thing with Nick for good and focus on fixing the damage you've done, or I'm going to fight you with everything I've got in court. And trust me, with what I know now, you'll lose. She nodded slowly, her tears still falling. "I'll end it," she whispered. "I'll tell him it's over." I wanted to believe her, but after everything, trust was a foreign concept. "You'd better mean it," I said, "because if you don't, I'll find out. And I won't hold back." The next day, Emily claimed she called Nick and ended things. She was somber, quiet, and for once, she didn't argue when I brought up the custody arrangements. Whether it was guilt, fear, or genuine remorse, I wasn't sure. As for me, I wasn't ready to forgive her. I wasn't sure if I ever could. But one thing was clear, my kids came first. Whatever happened between Emily and me, I would fight to give Liam and Sophie the stability they deserved. And as for Nick, he was out of our lives, but the damage he'd caused would linger for a long time. If I've learned anything from this nightmare, it's that you can't take the people you love for granted. But I've also learned that love isn't enough if there's no trust. Now I'm focused on rebuilding my relationship with my kids, my own sense of self, and maybe someday a life without Emily. But for now, I'm just grateful I didn't lose what matters most.